What is the worst experience you've had with a neighbor? Story 1. I used to have a neighbor that put their extra bags of garbage out next to mine. This might not seem like such a big deal, but it was nearly every week, and our municipality had a 2-bag limit. If you had extra bags, you had to put a 25-cent sticker on them or they would not be picked up. So every week, I would go out after putting my 2 cans out the night before and find that there were extra bags of someone else's garbage left behind. It took a long time to determine who the guilty party was, and a couple of extra bags each week added up. I would put on my rubber gloves, open the mystery bags, and sift through them trying to find identifying information. It was very frustrating because every week there was nothing. I knew that the culprits had kids because there were always dirty diapers. I knew that they were lazy because every bag was full of styrofoam plates and plastic cutlery, which they apparently found more convenient than washing dishes. Hence their production of surplus waste every week. This went on for a ridiculously long time. I would sift through their bags, be disappointed, rebag their garbage, and then grudgingly store it in my garage, with the only other option being to pay for surplus stickers to take it away. Happily, we didn't have a car, so there was lots of space in the garage. Then, one fine August day, it happened. A bill. A bill was in the garbage. A bill with an address on it. Finally, I knew which household was responsible for all the extra garbage. The cheapskates, who could not find it in their budgets to affix the mere 25-cent stickers for their surplus waste, and instead sneakily put it out in their neighbors' yards. They were 3 doors down and across the alley. I waited for their van to be gone and then went over to their gate, opened it, and placed all their garbage carefully back in their driveway. Since fair is fair, and I already obliged to handle their garbage and rebag it, I emptied it all out and took my bags back, leaving their 6 months extra garbage in a heap on their driveway. I don't think they ever worked out who got their revenge on them, since it was pretty clear that they were leaving extra bags for everyone who shared an alley with them, but that was the end of their illegal dumping. It does give me some satisfaction to know that even if I had to handle and rebag their garbage when it was fresh, they had to rebag it after it had been fermenting for months in my non-climate controlled garage. Jerks. I'm shocked you didn't simply stay up one night before garbage day and watch it like a hawk. It's what I'd do. Seems a lot easier and less messy than your method, but that doesn't have the tenacity of OP's method, the meticulousness of his revenge. And now, when they don't know who knows, they will be looking over their shoulders the entire time. OP's revenge was gross, but effective. I'm sure those people will now think twice before trying to make their trash someone else's problem. Story 2. We lived near a protected area for endangered animals. One of the animals that the sanctuary is meant to protect is bald eagles. Since we live next to a field, it's pretty common for an eagle to sit on our porch and disembowel a rabbit for dinner. We have a neighbor that keeps calling the cops on us because the bird is on our property and claims it is traumatizing his innocent children. He treats us like we're the ones murdering fluffy bunnies for our own amusement. Calling the cops on you because of something a wild animal is doing that you have no way of stopping? That's moronic. How freaking dare that eagle do what eagles do? It really is brain dead to call the cops on your neighbors for something like this. What were they supposed to do to prevent it from happening? Go out and ask the eagle to stop killing rabbits? Story 3. Neighbor behind my house would scream at her kids daily, to the point our kids would be afraid to play in the backyard. By scream, I mean swearing and vulgar name-calling to a kid that looked like he was 8 or 9. My ex even tried to help out one day. One of her kids was up a 3-story tall tree of hers that hung over our fence and wouldn't climb down, and this banshee was screaming all sorts of bile at him to come down. My ex calmly says to the boy, "Please climb down, sweetie, you might fall," to try and convince him. The woman then turns on her, "What the F do you think you're doing? Don't you effing talk to my kids." I made the mistake of calling the cops on her once while she was abusing several people. She then came after me physically. These kinds of stories make me so angry because nowhere in there besides you calling the cops and her getting away scot-free and trying to beat you up was there anything close to an attempt at justice. I had hoped the cops would get whatever social worker services involved, so they could help the kids out at the very least. I don't know if it was due to being a small country town or what, but they didn't do anything that I could see. Children are so sweet and innocent. I don't understand how anyone could speak to them so cruelly. This woman is just in the process of creating more monsters like her. Story 4. I lived in a house that had been split into 2 apartments. Next door was a crackhead. Normally, the crackhead kept to herself and didn't bother me except to bum a cigarette or 2 every few days. One day, she needed a smoke, but I was down to my last pack and payday wasn't for another 3 days, so I said no. She must have really needed a smoke because it was like a rage switch had been turned on in her head. I turned around and went back into my apartment to get away from her screaming at me, and she went back into her apartment and started pounding on the walls. Turns out that she grabbed a hammer and was smashing her way through the walls to my apartment. I called my boyfriend, who was basically a decent dude, and he rushed home and calmed her down. The hole in the wall was basketball-sized by the time she was stopped. Luckily for me, they were already being evicted, so I didn't have to worry about her anymore. That lady must have been pretty weak. Sheetrock doesn't stand up to hammers very well. Yeah, she was really skinny and sickly. I was surprised she got as far as she did without breaking her spindly little arms. Opie's neighbor turned into Jack Torrance from The Shining over a cigarette. Yikes. Story 5. I have actually been the terrible neighbor. It's something I actually still feel a little bad about. Basically, where we lived, we would get a lot of snails when it rained. I mean, buckets full of them. It was a ritual of my mother's to go out and collect them all and dispose of them humanely with a brick. Being a 6-year-old, I absolutely loved snails and would feel really bad for the little guys and would go out and grab as many as I could in order to save them. Of course, it made sense for me to simply throw them over the fence into my neighbor's yard, where they could live happily. It was only much later that I overheard a conversation between my neighbor and my mother where she was saying all her roses had been almost destroyed by snails. The even worse part was, apparently the roses belonged to her husband who had passed away, so they held a lot of sentimental value. After that, the snails got released to the house behind us, who my mom didn't like, so no one was none the wiser. Sorry, lady neighbor. I hope your roses grew back okay. You were 6 with no idea that what you were doing was wrong, and in fact, thought you were doing right. Don't let it bother you too much. Yeah, I agree. The lady was actually very nice, and I'm sure she would have thought it a funny story if she ever found out. Story 6. I work in the agricultural industry and sometimes have to help sort out disputes between neighbors. I have always been shocked as to how 2 grown adults or 2 families will allow the situation to degrade to the point of violence. One time, I was contacted because of a dam usage dispute. Basically, 2 warring neighbors were unsure of the boundary between their 2 properties, and both wanted to use this one particular dam. Both had fenced it off in the past, and both had cut the other neighbor's fence down. I identified who the dam belonged to and provided advice accordingly. The neighbor who came off second best wasn't happy. He didn't say anything to me, really, but he did throw a ton of dynamite in the dam, rendering it useless. It also exploded the animals drinking from it at the time of detonation. Another person is suspected of taking revenge on his neighbor for some sort of personal slight. I say suspected because it's been thoroughly investigated and no one knows the clear details. All I can say is that the neighbor disappeared without a trace, and rumor has it was cut into pieces and stuffed down an out-of-commission borehole. On other occasions, I've had to deal with neighbors who have shot each other, lit each other's infrastructure on fire, stolen each other's property, including livestock, or even in one case, revenge slept with the neighbor's daughter. It keeps life interesting. It's funny because I'm not shocked at all that the situation degrades into violence. Every single one of these stories is full of seemingly small misgivings that built up. So what are you supposed to do? And don't expect people to just live with the noisy neighbors. You don't have evidence for any real crime, so cops are out. Your apartment complex or neighborhood association has little authority, so they're no help, and your neighbor is an animal. That's why it's an issue in the first place. I can see how sane people can be driven to seem crazy. Heck, my neighbors are in the process of pushing me off the ledge right now. Mow that lawn louder. It's only 9 a.m. I definitely get what you mean. Stuff just escalates sometimes over petty crap. It's just weird when you come in at the end and have to figure out what the heck happened and why. Regardless of how, the situation escalated to this point. Using explosives was crossing the line. Story 7. I lived down the street from a drug dealer. My house was constantly being robbed by his customers. I forgot to lock my car and they stole my GPS and all my loose change. I didn't lock my shed and they took my lawnmower and gas. I assumed they filled their car up, but on the bright side, they returned the can to my shed after using it. If it wasn't locked up, they would steal it, which is why I don't have a bike anymore. Superstorm Sandy flooded my house with 2 feet of water. My front door wouldn't close because it had swelled from being immersed in water. My neighbors cleaned my house out. They took everything I own. They even went through my attic. They ripped my pipes out of the walls. They stole my oven, my sink, my furnace, my water heater, my refrigerator, my pavers, my car, my boat, my sports autograph collection with signatures from Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle, and my guns. But as expected, they never even touched my book collection. Back to what they took: my guitars, my video games, my TV, my sleeping bag, my computer, and my coin collection. Wow, that sucks. Out of curiosity, did you have insurance? If so, does it cover memorabilia such as coins and baseball cards? I had hurricane insurance, but Superstorm Sandy was classified as a tropical storm because the average wind velocity was a few miles per hour less than that of a Category 1 hurricane. So everything lost in the storm was just a loss. The police officer who filled out the report only wrote, "Everything was stolen." That gave me less than desirable evidence in fighting the insurance company who gave me a lowball offer of $2,000. That's really lowball. That's a 90-year-old naked man lowball. I eventually settled, and a church group heard my story and helped rebuild my house even though I'm an atheist. Last I heard, the drug dealer has Hep C, AIDS, and was living in a hotel. He got away with it, but his life is a lot sadder. Story 8. About 10 years ago, when we first moved into our current house, we gave our neighbors a set of keys in case of emergencies, or if there was something we needed while away on vacation. We frequently went out of town, and my dad would go on short weekend business trips, on which my mom and I would accompany him. Every time we came back, there was always subtle changes in the house, but too small to really question. Things like missing condiments, not as much toilet paper on the roll, mats or rugs seemed straighter and cleaner than when we left, etc. About 2 months later, our family came home from our trip a day and a half earlier. We pull up to our house, and first of all see a bunch of cars in our driveways, hear the pool and jacuzzi pumps running, and see the lights on. We go inside only to find our neighbors throwing a dinner party of some sort with a giant mess in the kitchen. Every plate, glass, and piece of silverware we owned was scattered about the house. Wine and liquor bottles lined the counter. A slew of people were in our pool and jacuzzi, and worst of all, one of our boats was missing from the dock and lifts, and the other one was filled with people leaving our harbor. The look on the neighbor's wife's face in the jacuzzi was priceless. A combination of utter shock and heightened fear as she saw my 6-foot big brown dad turning red in the face with intensifying anger. Everyone was out in a matter of minutes, and we had the locks changed, but she was kind enough to send over a team of maids to tidy up the place the next morning. It turned out that for 2 months, they had been using our house on the weekends. We even found loads of their laundry in our washer and dryer. 10 years fast forward, and my mom is best friends with her, and my dad just hates her so much. This is kind of hilarious. If my seemingly well-to-do neighbors gave me keys to their home with a pool and jacuzzi, the thought of going over there and doing some kind of role-playing would definitely cross my mind. It sounds like they at least cleaned up afterwards. Inviting over huge parties and driving the boats is way over the line though. It sounds cool until you realize that all the electricity, food, water, and fuel they were using is yours and you have to pay for it. Story 9. The little old lady across the street from me growing up was awful. Her evil dog bit people, but because her son was a cop, it was never put down. She also chained it to the street side of the yard, so it could go from her door to 6 feet into the yards across the street. She would walk down the street in just panties, yelling at the mailman to ring her doorbell no matter what is being delivered. She sat naked at the window and enjoyed traumatizing the poor man. She befriended my people-pleasing mother who felt bad for her, and then she would come over when my parents weren't there and the older kids were in charge. She would then steal and threaten to whoop us. When her dog finally died, her son arrested my older brothers. Why? Because she swore she saw them dump rat poison in its dish. A full doggy autopsy revealed the dog died because it was 15 and had doggy cancer. And the kicker, when my baby sister was about 5, she told her in front of me and my siblings that she should die because the night she was born was the night her husband died. She then referred to her as a soul stealer for several years. Calling a child a soul stealer and telling her that she should die really is the cherry on top of this psycho Sunday. Story 10. My friend growing up had neighbors that would shoot BB guns at their house. They would drop dead animals on the doorstep and even tried selling his older sister drugs to tick off their mom. Eventually, she got cameras installed around the house to catch them doing stuff to the house, but they would sneak around and cut the wires to the cameras. Finally, my friend's mom encased the cameras in plastic, and just in time, because not too long after, it recorded them sunbathing nude in the cul-de-sac. She is 300 plus pounds and the guy wasn't much bigger. The cops were called and not much else was done after that. Story 11. This was around 10 years ago. We received a phone call from the police station saying that our neighbor had filed a complaint. The complaint was that there was a very large pile of dirt and debris on our lawn in the backyard, and it was obstructing our neighbor's view out of their kitchen window. Now here's the best part. My family hadn't even moved in yet. We were in the middle of having the house built. It was a new subdivision. The worst part is we had a week to have it removed. Otherwise, we'd be fined. There is actually a bylaw against piles of dirt on your lawn. This neighbor was filing complaints before OP even moved in. I'm sure lots of fun times followed this experience once they actually moved in. Story 12. Lawyer here, who deals with a lot of land use and real estate issues. I have plenty of stories, but perhaps my favorite is the neighbor who sabotaged the other's septic system, causing a backup during a period of heavy rains. For those who don't know or understand how septic systems work, rising underground water tables are very bad for septic systems, particularly when there's no other water outlet. So the water rose and the septic system failed because the neighbor had plugged the outlet. Turns out the neighbor was a bonehead because they lived downhill, so the mucked water flowed onto the sabotaging neighbor's property. Things then spiraled out of control and there were some violent physical incidents, border disputes, a Tiananmen Square-style effort to prevent some minor soil excavation. Story 13. I moved into my current home in July of 2010. I immediately, upon moving in, started to become extremely close to my neighbor next door. Together, we were trying to help the cat colony on our block through trap and release. We've worked our butts off and, as of this year, are close to the triple digits. Around early 2012, we had another new neighbor move in. Terrible lady. Her and her family came to visit the neighborhood before moving in and saw we had a large cat problem. They claimed it was okay and decided to get the house. By late 2012, cats started dying. We were at a loss because we took care of the cats. We fed them, took them to the vet when needed, and fixed them to stop them growing the population. Not long after the first 3 died, we had an SPCA officer show up at both of our doors, claiming we were torturing cats and that we were hoarders. We both let the officer in the house to see how untrue the statement was, and showed him our trapping cages and the paperwork proving we have been fixing them. The officer worked with us and now, by law, all of the cats in our neighborhood belong to us. The city knows they aren't house cats and that we're just trying to help these animals, which in their eyes makes it okay. Not long after receiving the city's approval to continue with our work, more cats started to die. It started with black cats and then suddenly moved on to cats we cared about the most, the cats who would come into our house and relax for an hour before heading back out. One cat in particular, 3 houses on our block had been taken care of since he was born. He would come into the house, eat, sleep, and leave. He was the sweetest darn cat I've ever had the pleasure of knowing, and he just showed up dead on my neighbor's front doorstep. The same house he was born in front of, the very house who took him in for long periods of time. They had to find him lifeless. After this, they started to let their large dog, who they starve and chain to the front all day, run free on the streets when he sees a cat. They released him in front of us so that he could go after one of my house cats, and he would have gotten to him had I not tackled him. They complained, claiming he was just playing, and threatened us to bring their dog back. They've told us to our faces that we need to get rid of these cats or she would. Now it's a battle, a full-on war, protecting our cats and trying to get enough evidence to get her dog taken away so he at least has a shot at a better life. We've installed cameras on our block with the help and permission of the other neighbors, minus the psycho. We're a tight-knit, loving community. The cops won't listen until we prove it. Well, we're working on doing just that. She'll pay for what she's done. I had a similar problem a few years ago. A woman that had lived halfway down the block was complaining that cats were chasing the birds away from the feeders in her yard. She said she was going to get rid of whatever cats she caught in her yard. Within a few days, every orange tabby went missing. One of mine, her neighbor, and another household's. We never could prove she killed them, but we know what that evil woman did. Thankfully, we moved and don't have to deal with that crap anymore. Hurting an innocent animal is one of the most wicked things you can do. And for what? Because the cats were annoying? I hope OP found some justice. Story 14. When I was 15, my family's house burned to the ground. Our awful neighbors sat in lawn chairs pointing and laughing as we watched our whole lives burn down. I'll never ever, as long as I live, forget the smug smirk on the dad's face as he saw me and my little brothers crying over the loss of everything we knew. Story 15. My neighbors in college thought it would be fun to shoot the pellet gun in their backyard. When shooting at cans wasn't satisfying anymore, they went ahead and shot my cat. I was gone at the time, and when I got back home, my cat had run back in through the window to hide, leaving blood all over the floors. I took him to the vet who removed the pellet, but he died 2 days later from peritonitis. It is one of the saddest moments of my life. Please tell me someone was called and they were punished somehow. I had gone to the lawyer on campus, but she was kind of a nut job. I could have filed animal cruelty charges, but it was just so traumatic I decided not to drag it out. I do believe that people get what they have coming to them, though. Story 16. When I was about 12, our neighbors placed edible poison in our yard and killed our dog, a beautiful Rottweiler, who they thought was going into their yard late at night and digging. It wasn't. The culprit was a dog about 3 houses down that was also huge and black, some sort of shepherd mix. I'm sure they also realized this when our dog died and the digging continued. Wow, what awful people. That must be illegal, seeing as how they put poison on your property. Yes, very horrific and definitely illegal. There was just no way to prove that they did it. We only found out because they made an offhand comment to the people who owned the dog that actually was doing the digging. I can't believe there are this many people out there that are willing to kill animals just to prove a point. These people are out there and they exist. They go to your grocery stores. They pay taxes, maybe, and they vote. These are psychopaths. Story 17. I lived in a townhouse converted into 2 apartments, the top floor and bottom floor. On the bottom floor, there were 2 guys who graduated college and never left the town. One was a photographer and the other sold drugs. They were really into EDM and felt the need to mount their surround sound to the living room ceiling, which coincidentally was directly below my bedroom. Every morning at 2 a.m., even on weekdays, they would get home from the club with a group of people and start blasting music in this poorly insulated old townhouse. And I mean blasting. I would wake up every night to the windows shaking and things vibrating off of my nightstand. I tried everything from asking them to quiet down because I'm a full-time student with a full-time job and need the only 6 hours of sleep I'm entitled to speaking with my landlord who threatened them with eviction, to which they responded, "It's a 3-month process in court. Go ahead, buddy." I also tried switching off the breakers in the apartment and calling the cops. These guys were so self-entitled and ruthless. The apartments were set up really weird. At the top of what used to be steps to a second floor, there was a door with no handle or latch, so technically they could walk into our apartment whenever they pleased. And they did. One of them would always be coming up and randomly opening my bedroom door to ask to borrow stuff. He wouldn't even knock. One day, he was making pot brownies and covered the oil, for some stupid reason, and caught the downstairs on fire. He opened my door to black smoke pouring in behind him and his hair singed and hand melted off. A few nights later, he came back home blackout drunk. He felt the need to tell me that he just really wanted to dominate me physically and emotionally, that he really wanted to make me cry but he didn't know why, that he thinks he might actually be the Antichrist, and that his purpose was to be put on this earth to show others pain so they can realize life is suffering. Then I can't quite remember, but I think he started crying. I moved out. Good move moving out, OP. It's probably best to avoid being neighbors with the Antichrist, if you can help it, of course. Story 18. There was this girl that lived next door to me. Let's call her Boo, because that's what she liked to be called. I invited her over to my house for drinks once, and she stole my steaks from the freezer. That was when I lived in the ghetto. When I lived in a more affluent area, Crazy still was nearby. Another neighbor stole my cat. The cat went missing for a few days, then showed up back at my doorstep. I took her back in. A few days later, there were lost cat posters on the doors with a picture of my cat. The neighbor came by while I was still figuring out what to tell her about the cat, and when I opened the door, the cat was standing there between my legs. She was really flustered. When I told her that it was my cat and always had been, she said, "Well, I already paid to have her shots." I can't even fathom what she was thinking. This cat is a beautiful Bengal that likes to hang around on the steps outside of my apartment. Obviously not a stray. I'm glad you got your cat back. Something similar happened to a friend of mine, even though the cat was wearing a collar and microchipped. Mo was an indoor/outdoor cat, and my friend was devastated when she disappeared. 3 weeks later, a vet called up saying that Mo was in the clinic for shots. Apparently, the vet checked the chip and noticed that the owner's info didn't match. Then, as icing on the cake, the cat thief not only begged my friend to let her keep Mo, but also had her mom call up to try an extra guilt trip. But she's clearly well cared for and well loved. Some people, man, it's not like there's a cat shortage. After hearing some of these other stories, I'm really grateful these cats were only stolen and not hurt. It's still crazy, but a less evil brand. Story 19. My sister had a new neighbor move into the house next door, and right away he took down their mailbox. They went over to get it and he said it was his, that it came with the house, even though it had my sister's family's name on it. The police were called and they got it back, but he ended up taking it a few more times over the course of 6 months, then eventually took him to court. But on the court date, my sister was in the hospital and couldn't make it. The guy won by default and went right home and took the mailbox again. He mounted it on the roof of his front porch like some kind of trophy. It was very strange pulling up to their house and seeing their mailbox standing on his roof with their name on it. Story 19. We had a little old lady living across the street from us who was clinically insane. I was friends with their granddaughter for a while, but when she learned my parents were friendly with some other neighbors, her enemies, she turned on us. She would scream obscenities at my family when she saw us on the street. I was between 6 and 10 years old during this period. She and her family would visit people moving in and tell them I was a bad kid and to keep their kids away from me. I was a straight-A student and an all-around good kid. She even called the cops on my dad when she spotted him and my brother playing with plastic swords in our yard. She ended up pouring gasoline on herself and setting herself on fire in her backyard, and she stopped harassing us after they got her help. Holy crap, that is not the ending I expected. No kidding. I remember my mom being really freaked out because the rumor was that she lured a few neighbors' kids into her backyard before she lit the match. The kids weren't hurt, but they had to watch the whole thing. Story 20. Cop here. I went to a disturbance call where 2 neighbors were blowing leaves at each other with leaf blowers. They were actually mad while doing this. What did you even say to them? How did you keep a straight face? Is there such a thing as assault by crunchy leaves? I didn't say a word, just looked at them and left. Honestly, I thought I was going to get in trouble for it because that's not really professional. This story made me picture SpongeBob and Patrick blowing leaves at each other over some trivial dispute. I'm Dirty Dan. Story 21. My neighbor cut the cable with her garden shears. I presume because of an argument over the bill. She wouldn't let the cable company in to repair it, so they had to bypass her house. My house and about 6 others had no TV, phone, or internet for 8 days. I don't understand how this is legal. If it was just affecting her, fine, but to leave several other people screwed, there was nothing they could do? I would have called in 10 times a day and whined until they did something. Look at it from the other side. Unless the cable company had a granted easement, it may have been actually illegal for the company to be there in the first place. So her cutting the lines would be completely legally justifiable. Still a crappy move, but legal. Story 22. Our neighbor has a really yappy dog named Jimmy who drives us nuts. When the neighbor asked us to cut down a little tree in our yard that was casting a shadow on her garden, my husband resolved that he would cut it down only when Jimmy shut up. That is never. A couple weeks later, we found the tree cut down. The maniac must have snuck into the yard at night and cut it down. I can't stand that lady. Is this even legal? I feel like there are a lot of crimes being committed to achieve this task. Maybe you can get some justice. We don't have any proof that she did it, apart from the fact that she asked us to cut it down earlier. I doubt that would hold up. Trees have monetary value, so you can usually sue for things like this. I've seen it done. Story 23. We rented the first floor of a house and the lady upstairs was getting ready to move out. One evening, water started pouring down from the ceiling into our living room from about 12 different spots, like it was raining inside our apartment. I banged on the upstairs door, nothing. I called the landlord and he refused to come over since she wasn't home. I know there are exceptions to the landlord not entering a dwelling he owns, but this had to be one of them. He offered no help, but he gave me her work number. I called her at work and she said she couldn't leave. So, sorry, she never even bothered to mention that she was draining her waterbed by putting the drain hose out one of the bedroom windows. The hose had fallen back inside. It would have taken 2 seconds to fix the problem. Your landlord is the dumbest person in this story. How the heck could he ignore serious damage like that? Yes, he was even dumber than the lady upstairs. She was leaving and didn't give a crap. The damage to the dwelling he owned was substantial. Slumlord jerk. Thanks for watching and/or listening all the way to the end. If you have a similar story to one of these, please leave it down in the comments below. I'd love to make a video on those in the future. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.